The secret's out. I'm a queer leftist. Who could have guessed? Who could have? None of you would have known if I never told any of you. I know I'm the most masculine, heteronormative appearing motherfucker on the planet, but secret's out, I guess. So as you can see behind me, I have set up the little pride flag so that I can signify to you visually that I am queer and that this is my representation, like I'm one of these stripes on this flag. I don't identify with the LGBTQIA plus community, not for like reasons of like queer phobia or nothing, more just to the extent of like not being for labeling my sexuality. I feel like that's kind of limiting towards just sexuality as a whole. So if you're confused, don't be. If you want this dick, I'll let you know. You know what I mean? But yeah, I don't prescribe myself with any specific labels. I don't like to do that. I feel like that's kind of limiting. Gender-wise, I would just refer to myself with they, them. I don't care if you say he, him, or she, her, or Zer, or Zem. I don't care what pronouns you use with me. But if you're one of those types of people who needs me to confirm my identity to you through pronouns, like to tell you which pronouns to use, you can just use they, them, and we're chilling. So, my grievances with Marxism. Smooth transition. As somebody who defines himself as kind of against neoliberalistic fascism and fascism as a whole, it's very interesting to me to have conversations with people who self-identify themselves within a Marxist framework. Particularly, like very much within a Marxist ideology, either directly getting ideas from like Marx or like post-Marx ideas like Althusser, Gramsci, and all these different Marxist philosophers. I find it very fascinating as somebody who is not a Marxist, but who is very influenced, of course, by Marxism as a whole and Karl Marx himself as a philosopher. Though I do find my grievances with Marxism in the particularities, though I prefer not to be an infighter and, critique other leftists for having a viewpoint that's not leftist enough, or that's not, like, if we're all working towards on the same goals of combating, colonialism and queerphobia and a lot of these systemic issues as a whole, it's not very useful to just infight a lot and just very much particularly focused on, hey, let's make sure that this thing doesn't happen as much. But if we're all leftists here and we can all have a conversation for a second about this without any fascists coming in and being like, oh, gender, or like some stupid shit. Like if we can all kind of base this conversation on the same kind of framework of sorts, not particularly in philosophy, but just in the idea that, like, racism still exists, queerphobia still exists, ableism still exists, like, we can all agree on those issues. I think there's a very interesting conversation to be had between the post-structuralist side and the Marxist side, and just kind of, all becoming postmodern neo-Marxists. I find that a lot of people who share my kind of view in philosophical framework, especially inspired by Foucault, kind of dismiss Marxism as a whole without kind of identifying how important Marxism as a field is to the thought of deconstructionism and how important Marx was himself for recognizing different power dynamics with his critiques of capital. Alright, I got the comfy cozy on. If you don't know what a comfy cozy is, it's a jacket that's comfy and cozy. It's just like a really big jacket with like fluff in it and stuff. It's really comfortable. You should get yourself one. When it comes to my personal opinion on Marxism, if you want my opinion on like the framework, the field of thought itself, I think it's pretty outdated personally. I think the entire system of thought of Marxism as a sole lens of analysis is kind of gives you a more narrow view of philosophical analysis. I think one of the biggest contributions that Marx has provided in the field of philosophy is the way in which his thought has forced a rethinking of historiography. First, with his focus on the relations of production, he provided really interesting and persuasive arguments against like anthropology and humanism, or more specifically than just the field and the frameworks themselves, kind of arguments against their view of history as a conforming form of like identity and continuation. Not only was Marx one of the most like significant political economists to ever live, but I also kind of categorize him as something of a critical vitalist. If you've read Capital, he goes on this very long exploration of issues related to life, the employment of women and children in automated factories, the intensification of labor and its effects, and his broader reflections on industrial pathology. They offer really intriguing insights, and I would say they're much akin to like the ideas that Foucault draws upon in his like analysis of biopower. Foucault draws a really distinct connection between the development of capitalism and the emergence of biopower. And he talks about how biopower was a really vital component in the growth of capitalism. You know, it required the integration of bodies into the production process and the alignment of population phenomena with economic processes. And that's kind of the explanation towards why one would call Marx a critical vitalist. Even with like the panopticon in Foucault's Discipline and Punish, he relies really heavily on Marx, especially in like docile bodies, because he'll draw very extensively to Marx when trying to define discipline, since it's so closely related to his idea of biopower, as Foucault was really analyzing Marx's writings on cooperative labor organization, especially in like capitalist societies. And there's a quote that I have written down somewhere one moment. Discipline is no longer simply an art of distributing bodies, of extracting time from them and accumulating it, but of composing forces in order to obtain an efficient machine. And when he says like machine, he's not only referring to like technological objects, but also like the combination of human and machine, or like worker and tool. And that really comes into issue, especially with Foucault, on power's productivity, because you cannot just rely on the panopticon, and it really relies heavily on Marx's interpretation, especially from his observations on the division of labor in workshops and factories. And that's how Foucault really came to this conclusion of the dispersion of power, and no singular unitary body of power, but really just a multitude of different institutions in which power disperses itself through. Alright, so I want to talk about the next video that I want to do. It's between an Animal Farm video and a Queer Envy video. The Animal Farm video would just be titled "Watch This" instead of reading Animal Farm. And it's basically themed at talking to people who are assigned the text of Animal Farm for the purposes of just consuming American propaganda, and just saying like, hey, this is the leftist critique of this, especially within like communist spheres, and this is why Orwell's kind of a fucking idiot. And even though I've just expressed extensively that I am not a Marxist, I do have my critiques with Orwell's oversimplification. It's overly simplistic to like the kind of struggles that happened over in the Soviet Union and the Russian Revolution in 1917, and just pointing out the historical inaccuracies and just the inaccuracies with the allegory in general, and then maybe moving into a direction of propaganda, but that's kind of overstated in every leftist sphere, or moving into the sphere of Orwell himself and why his misrepresentation might be fueled by the United States propaganda machine, and just going down that direction and talking about like Jordan Peterson's sphere with communism and how that was influenced by like the 1960s, 1970s, those 1970s, 1980s kind of anti-communist propaganda machine of the United States, and talking about the fears and anxieties that were produced by the United States government, which is why in this video I talked about my grievances with Marxism as a sort of precursor in case I decide to go in that direction. The reason I talked about my queerness in this video is because of my other video idea. The title still in progress, but it's going to be something like Queer Envy, the Homoeroticism in Combat Sports, or Male-Predominant Combat Sports, pick or choose. And the idea of queer envy comes from Rhizomatic Memer and their analysis on queer envy, and I don't want to spoil the video too much in case I do decide to make it, as it's the more likely of the two. But the reason I brought up my queerness was for this video, and so that if I just started dropping like queer theory, nobody would be like, are you an ally or are you an ally? Within that, there would be a lot of introduction that I have to do in regards to like the Lacanian, Zizekian kind of style of the faux pas of the feminine and masculine sex, and having to explain a lot of shit that I would be feeling like would be redundant as an explanation, having to go into Lagones and the colonial gender binary system, and having to do a lot of talking about that and making it a very like big video essay. But I don't have as many like cinematography kind of ideas about that video as I would about the Animal Farm video. And I have been extremely jealous of Isaac's cinematography for a very long time. And I wanted to shoot something that looks pretty, but it's just always it never ended up being what I wanted it to be. Not in like a perfectionist kind of manner. I don't want CJ the X coming for me or nothing, but more in the sense that it just doesn't look good. I'm not really focused on art as much as I am on ideas. But I do want to make good art. Like, I want to make this look good. I'm not exactly sure. Those are kind of my ideas. This is why this video exists, as a precursor to one or the other video, and just any future videos I might make on either subject. Just kind of telling you who I am and my views on Marxism, in case I decide to make the Animal Farm video and everyone mistakes me for like this like Marxist. It's like I'm not really, but I can talk about it at a pretty rudimentary level, so that was kind of the idea with this video. But this kind of now forces me to make one or the other videos and stops me from procrastinating any further. And I also have schoolwork to do, so I'm procrastinating on a lot of things. I'm procrastinating doing my schoolwork by making videos, and I'm procrastinating about making a video by making another video. I'm caught in a loop. I'm gonna go do some schoolwork.